Okay, good morning. Is my audio okay for remote? Okay, great. So welcome back to
Sounds good.
everybody. Day 2. We're going to get right into it. This is the note well. We looked at it previously. Please note it well. It contains all the IETF's policies that cover this meeting. Do we have a note taker for today? Everybody starts hiding. Anyone able to take notes? Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. So we updated our agenda.
Pardon me, Alyssa. Could we get the note taker's name just for the record?
Thomas McCarthy Howe.
Thank you, Thomas.
So we updated our agenda for session 2 a little bit. The discovery section is just a little bit shorter. And then we made time to revisit the metadata privacy topic. So Richard is going to lead us through that, try to get to a conclusion of some kind on that. Does anybody want to bash the agenda? Nope. Okay. Then we will start with Femi. So do you want me to just share? Okay. Yep. Let's see. Does it work? There you go.
Okay. Thank you, everyone, for joining this morning session. My name is Femi Holumofin. So I'll be talking about MIMI discovery requirements. This is a joint work with a number of people in our work group, like Giles, John, and Jonathan. See right there. Oh, that's John at the back. Okay. So what is MIMI user discovery about? It's about enabling a message sender to locate the messaging services for which a particular recipient can be reached. So that means I can locate someone without first knowing whether they are on WhatsApp or iCloud or some other messaging service. So this draft outlines requirements for user discovery using globally unique identifiers like telephone numbers and email addresses. Okay. So here are some lists of terminologies. So we've had a couple of MIMI interim meetings where we kind of refine this terminology. This is where we are. And I think this really captured the essence of the new or the concept we'll be covering in this requirement. So service-specific identifier is an identifier that is scoped to a specific service. It is not globally unique. Cross-service identifier is the final name we got to. That wasn't the name we started with originally. So this is a globally unique identifier, like telephone number and email addresses. Of course, we have the messaging service provider, which is things like WhatsApp, Wire, Telegram, and so on. cross-service identifier provider. This is the telcos and the email service provider. So they issue globally unique identifiers to users. And of course, the last but not the least is the discovery provider. So this entity doesn't yet exist, and we expect they will be the provider of user discovery service. So essentially, they will help to map user cross-service identifier to MSPs. Okay, so what is the discovery problem? What does it take to solve this problem? So there are two main components of the problem. The first of which is asserting verifiable mapping between a cross-service identifier and a messaging service provider. So we want the mapping to be verifiable. We want the mapping to be legitimate. Also, the second aspect of it is after a mapping is established, we want users to be able to use that mapping to figure out messaging service provider for which a user can be reached. So while we are covering this, solving these two main problems, we want to make sure that we prioritize user privacy, and we also want to give user some preferences in deciding how they would like to be discovered. And of course, we want this to work well with MIMI other protocols, as well as end-to-end encryption. So, maybe next slide, okay. I will cover the requirements for user discovery under these 5 main components. This is the groupings of the requirement. What are the requirements for creating that mapping of CSI to MSPs? Discovery protocol, how do we look up users? Then what about preferences? What aspect of user preferences do you think is a critical requirement we have to cover? Are there operational requirements? What about security and abuse prevention? We don't want someone elsewhere to kind of enumerate the entire database of mapping and use it for spam purposes. We added some requirements to ensure that we kind of prevent that. Okay. Next slide. So the first one, authenticating mappings. So how do we create that representation of a cross-service identifier or a telephone number mapping to a messaging service provider? We want to ensure that the client, the messaging service provider, and the discovery provider are all involved in computing this representation. We also want the client to be able to solve a proof of possession problem. We want to know you actually own that telephone number for which you are creating a mapping for. Also, we want the MSP to be able to assert that indeed this telephone number is reachable on my service. If I WhatsApp saying your phone number can be reached on my service. Also, we don't want DPs because DP is pretty open. Someone can spin up a DP somewhere and start creating mapping with any other people telephone number. We don't want that to happen. We want to be able to prevent the DP from being independently being able to create mappings. And last but not the least, once this mapping is created, we want other users to be able to prove that this mapping was jointly completed by these 3 entities. Essentially, do a signature checks, having the public keys of those 3 parties. You can do a threshold signature check to ensure that all the parties involved are involved in computing that mapping. Okay. So here had the requirement for mapping. This is not working well. Okay. Just delay. Okay, so all the points I mentioned in the prior slide, and these are the 6 requirements we came up with for this mapping. So I'll give you a couple of minutes to go over it, and if anyone has questions, please feel free to ask it. I will have to limit question time to about 5 minutes so that we'll be able to cover the whole slide. Okay, I think Daniel,
Oh, we can't hear you.
you're mute.
How about that? Is that better?
Yes.
Yep.
Great. Sorry. Thank you for this. I'm trying to understand the requirement to prevent independent DP assertions on the previous slide.
Mhm.
It strikes me that that's impossible, right? I mean, if no matter what my entity is, if I'm a discovery provider or whatever, I can always make independent assertions, right? I can just publish a web page that says this address goes to this other address, right? What does it mean to say prevent independent DP assertions?
Yeah, so assuming we look at a world where the public keys are published externally for each telephone number, for example, as well as the DP, as well as the MSPs. If in that way, the DP cannot use a different public key to create that signature. You got to use, it couldn't, the DP cannot falsify that signature on the mapping. So if the public key for the CISP is indeed public, is published on the internet, for example.
I'm in queue as well. Yeah.
Hey, John,
John
go ahead.
Peterson, to add to that. Yeah, I mean, I think our intention behind this, right, is DPs are not the root of the authority in this model, right? Like the DP is a place where authenticated mappings are aggregated, and the relying parties in this architecture have a trust relationship with those trust anchors. Now, what are they? We define a bit of this. In some cases, they may be MSPs themselves. It may be a case where WhatsApp is the one who asserts, like, there's a mapping from this number to WhatsApp, and provided people trust them, and we're not going to tell you here in the IETF who you should trust or why. That's like up to the conscience of the individual churchgoer, right? But we've also looked at these third-party models, and this is where it gets into some other things I know we're about to discuss at some length here today. But we've looked at these third-party models where there will be trust anchors whose job is to go validate that relationship between an MSP and a TN that is held by a particular customer of that MSP. And indeed, in that instance, relying parties in this architecture are trusting those trust anchors. Why they trust them? Hey, that's up to them, right? But we're going to have a set of practices that are defined that like those things do in order to do their job. And so I don't even want to look at the problem like the problem is how, can DPs create these mappings? I don't think there's any variant of this where we look at it's like the DP itself, that logical function that generates authenticated mappings.
Did that answer your question?
I think so. I'll follow along, and maybe I'll understand it a little bit better as we go. Thanks.
All right, thank you. So who is next?
Hi, Brendan McMillian.
Brendan, yeah.
Yeah. So you have a couple of requirements here saying that the discovery provider should not be able to make false positives, essentially. You shouldn't be able to assert a binding that wasn't actually authenticated. But are you also interested in preventing false negatives as well, like suppression? Like, is there a requirement for that?
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah. So we talk a lot during the interim meeting about bias. Like a DP might just say, okay, you will ignore mappings that exist in other DP and only use its own local database to answer user response. Yeah, it's a possibility, but the thinking is that this is very hard to fix technically. We should rather rely on policy in addressing things like bias. Yeah. Okay. I think Ted.
Thanks very much. I just wanted to follow up on a point that I think I heard John make, and that is that there's no condition in which you want to set up a system which determines why a particular relying party would trust a particular responding DP. And it seems to me that a consequence of that is that you don't actually have a possibility of doing a referral-based system where a single DP queries other DPs that it trusts because it doesn't know whether the ultimate relying party would trust them or not. If that's the case, it's fine, but I think I just want to understand whether that's an intent of this inability of somebody to have one that's not jointly computed by a client MSP and the DP, because it seems to be at that point, since you'd have different DPs, one DP, in essence, relaying on behalf of another would be problematic in this. And the case I'm thinking about in particular is like WhatsApp and one of Meta's other messaging protocols. If WhatsApp wanted to answer for Facebook Messenger, it couldn't do that. It would have to say, nope, not here, go find somebody else you trust. And they would then have to try Facebook Messenger. Is that correct?
Yeah, go ahead, John.
Well, yeah. So, I mean, the one kind of correction I'd make in terms of the statement that I made earlier was that I don't view the DPs as the people you trust. I view the authenticated mappings as what you trust. The DP is merely a conduit for it. And we start getting things like suppression or bias. This is where more interesting questions get raised, because a DP could, of course, choose to share with you some records and not others. And there's like ways for bias to be injected into the system through that. But obviously, the intention is that there could be multiple layers of recursion or indirection. To me, the authenticated mapping should contain all the information a relying party needs to trust them, provided they could get them. The tricky part is just, if we imagine these DPs are primarily going to be run by MSPs, and I think there are certainly that seems like a very likely use case in the architectures that we're envisioning, then the MSP's decision then to show you perhaps only a subset of authenticated mappings or to prioritize its own, that gets more into these kinds of suppression cases that are scary. But it's not a matter of I trust this because I got it from the DP. I would trust this authenticated mapping if I found it on the floor on a piece of paper in a bus station, right? Because it's cryptographically attested. That makes sense?
I think, yeah, it does. I think what you might want to do is modify how you're presenting this requirement 3 then, to say that the DP provides a verifiable mapping, but it is not necessarily the DP that's providing you that answer. The authoritative DP, if you like, is the one that provides that. And so whether or not you accept it is whether or not you accept that DP as an authority for that MSP, and not whether the person you got it from is the DP who signed it. That allows you to both handle your got it from the side of a bus or pick it up on the bus station floor case or a relay case, which I do think in some cases might be possible.
Yeah, the relay case should be possible, but again, I still hear you using the language, I trust it because I got it from this DP. And that's the part that I'm poking at, right? Because it's
yeah. What I should have
mapping
said
that you trust.
Right.
Yeah.
What I should have said is that the mapping is verifiable to you, even though the DP that helped create that mapping and the DP from whom you got that mapping are not the same. Does that work?
All right.
Yep, totally
Yeah.
cool. Yes.
That's
Okay,
right.
thanks very much. Much
Okay.
appreciated.
Okay, let's go on to the next slide. So next, let's talk about preferences. So when we talk about preferences, there are multiple stakeholders. Either the sender of the message might have preferences for how they would like to discover someone else, or the recipient with the map identity might also have some preferences on how the recipient would like to be found, as well as the entities, the DPs, and the collaborating MSP, they might have their own preferences as well. So we talk a lot about this at prior MIMI interim meetings. So we even more recently, we kind of look at the sender, because the sender is the one finding a recipient. So he has some preference on how he would like to find that recipient. However, the recipient is the one being found. So we rather decide to prioritize recipient preference because it's not active in that action of discovery. So we dig a little bit deeper into recipient preferences by kind of coming up with a couple of critical user journeys. The details is on the draft, as some of them are shown here. For example, a recipient might say, okay, when somebody is finding me to a particular MSP, I want the person to contact me through the same messaging service. Maybe you find me through WhatsApp, so you should find my WhatsApp. I want us to be on the same platform, for example. Or I might say, okay, I don't want any other messaging service. Everyone should only find me through Wire, for example. So the recipient can express that preference. Also, we don't want a situation whereby I have multiple mapping in different messaging service. So the recipient just picks one of them and sends message. So the message gets sent to some random messaging service, which is a horrible experience for the user. We don't want that. Also, we don't want messages to kind of be broadcasted to all my messaging service. That also doesn't make sense and things like that. So given the complexity of that, so we defer most of the preference decision to individual implementation and only provide a basic requirement for recipient preferences. So just one.
Can you expand the acronym CUJ?
Oh, CUJs?
Yeah.
Oh, critical user journey.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, can we just say real quick, I'm looking around the room, people get this, right? What we're saying is we're not going to do this, right?
Yeah.
We're punting this to implementation, all this question about preferences, because it's extremely complicated. We're saying MSPs are going to take care of that themselves. People are cool with that? Just making sure, because like it's important question. I'm cool with it. Okay, cool. Look at that.
Cool. Thank you, John. Okay, next slide. Okay. So this is the only basic recipient preference we're going to provide. Like when you have multiple mappings with different MSP, you can either specify an index or a string to kind of express your preference, attach a preference to that mapping. If it's an index, we can use the index for the purpose of prioritizing the mapping. Maybe your default is your mapping to MSP1. We can also get creative by using string like business or my soccer moms or basketball mom team. You can also include that. So this is the basic thing requirement we want to be able to provide for recipient. So I'll take a pause. And does anyone have a comment? Does this look good?
Jonathan Rosenberg, it's from 5.9. It's worth noting also, in case it's not obvious from this, that there is an implied preference which is just going to happen, which is the same app preference, right? And the reason for that is Mimi concerns itself with only after a provider has decided that this is a federation operation. And certainly today, if I'm in WhatsApp and I look for another user, like it goes to WhatsApp first. Like, so my assumption is that when this would be deployed by a WhatsApp or Facebook Messenger, it would have already looked for this person inside their own app. That's totally outside the scope of our control. And this sort of engages only when we're probably looking to do federations. I think it's worth noting that for folks thinking about the same app preference requirement.
Yep. Thank you, Jonathan.
Okay.
I mean,
You look puzzled, Alyssa, so.
no, I'm not puzzled. I mean, it's like maybe, but
Maybe.
don't really know. Like,
Fair enough.
I mean, whatever's in the public domain about what the WhatsApp interface looks like doesn't necessarily imply this. What it looks like is that when you want to use what they call whatever off network messaging,
Right.
that's like a separate interface. So
That's
when you
right.
go in there, will it necessarily direct you with
Yeah.
preference to WhatsApp
Yeah.
users? Maybe not, because you already had to navigate
Yeah.
this clunky
Fair
interface.
enough. I think it's perhaps what I'm saying is better stated as there's a step prior to this is an unknown behavior subject to the proprietary implementation of which provider, which is like what happens when we decide to go out. And so that's nothing we can do about that.
Okay, thank you.
Bengo.
So I have to admit, I don't fully understand. So like how does this label allow the recipient to control their preferred contact method with the label like business or basketball? Like what's the connection between business and basketball and ability to control it?
Oh yeah, so this is like saying that I have multiple mappings. I can tag them like basketball, for example. I know my basketball friends, dad. I can say, okay, reach me on my, they know, it's implicit. They know I'm kind of in a group with these guys. I want to reach him. It's for basketball. Maybe I should use the basketball one.
If it was like a DNS name, would that be
It's not a
realistic?
DNS name. This is brand new. Yeah, just a string.
Like I can see I'd be like, contact me on basketball.com. And that would help me control my preferred contact method. But
no, it just for the recipient to kind of express a purpose for this mapping. Like if you have multiple mappings from me and I tag this as a basketball, I'll probably pick the basketball one as opposed to any other one.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think I
It's
understand.
very basic and simple. It's not DNS lookup. Yeah. Thank you.
Hi, this is Daniel Kahn-Gilmore again. So John Peterson just said at the end of the last slide that everybody understands that we are punting this. We're not going to make a decision about how this works, and we're going to leave it to the MSP. And I just wanted to flag that I think what we're saying is we're going to leave it to the Mimi client app, not to the MSP. And I think if we architecturally assume that the MSP is the Mimi client app, that creates a whole different set of underlying practices for what we're doing here. So I personally would prefer it if we did not architecturally assume that the MSP is the Mimi client software. And I think, John, tell me if I'm getting this wrong, I think you meant we're punting this to the client app, not to the MSP. Is that right?
Answer.
Yeah, I mean, so what we're talking about here on this slide is a little bit different from previous slide in that we're now looking at potential categories and ways you could group your contacts, which to me is another client implementation question. If, for example, I don't know who Femi's basketball friends are, but he does, right? And I can imagine there being a way that he could curate that would make sense. I think in the previous slide we were talking much more about the broader kind of sender and receiver preferences negotiation problem, and the way that we could try to suss out, can I push like a policy document up to an MSP or perhaps some even more authoritative entity that explains how I want these things to work, that entity will be responsible for executing when you go to a discovery provider and the discovery provider is giving you a list of potential MSPs to contact. Like we're punting on that. What I think the little bit of this little wedge that Femi and I don't entirely agree about this, as I think he knows from our previous offline conversations. The wedge that Femi is proposing we put into this is a very rudimentary, if I can like group my own contacts thing, right? There should be a way for me to get that from my client into something that will determine to some degree how the MSP behaves. But I do think this is orthogonal though to exactly how the Mimi client level streams operate.
It sounds like you're saying that I'm going to depend on the messaging service provider to tell me how to route things, instead of saying I'm going to depend on my client app to decide how to route things.
No, we look at it from the discovery perspective. Like, honestly, it is more the server to server problem we're concerned with than the client to server set of issues in Mimi, right? And, if Richard, I think, had some slides that he constantly shows about really where the line of demarcation is in Mimi between what we're trying to achieve and what we're not trying to achieve. Broadly, what we're saying is we don't think we have enough control over the way that MSPs are going to present a user experience to be able to be very prescriptive about the requirements in this space. We can be at least somewhat prescriptive if we feel like it about the MSP to MSP communications, the way that once you say, I want to communicate with this, what happens after that? And, you know, in the interims, we went through this, and I believe you were on at least some of the interim calls, this question of, is it really, for example, the client that talks to the DP, or is it the MSP that talks to the DP on behalf of the client? And part of what, you know, we threw our hands up about in this was, well, really, what is the distinction between the client and the MSP for a lot of the ways these MSP implementations work? At the MIMI layer, we're concerned about the security association, completely different question. But this high level, like routing, how do I discover, how do I figure out which MSP I need to communicate with? Like that, it's really hard for us to tear apart what the client and MSP's roles are in that. Does that help?
I mean, it does, but it also worries me deeply because it sounds to me like you're saying we are conflating the MSP with the MIMI client, and I think that's a problem.
No, yeah,
no, it's the user experience. It's the user experience of the MSP that we're conflating with the MSP, not.
But the user doesn't experience an MSP. The user experiences an app. Anyway,
yeah, because of time, let's move forward. So the client and the MSPs are separate entities. What we kind of landed from what John was mentioning at the MIMI interim meeting is that both of those, the MSP and the client, could be the client of a discovery provider.
I'm going to close the queue for this one. So.
Okay, thank you.
Rio Kazura, somewhat related to like the last question about who talks to the DP, is it the MSP or the client? Does this discovery mechanism include same app discovery, or does this handle only cross app? Because if the same app is implied in the same app preference is implied, it might use a different mechanism that is inside the MSP. Okay, yeah. So
yeah.
Already answered. Okay. So,
mostly for cross app, yeah, but we did not.
So if like same app is the MSP's responsibility, I think for the same app case, we might be able to like eliminate some of the like cryptographic stuff that implies is used in multiple servers. Like
yeah, same app is everything is local within the MSP. They already have a system that does that, so we are really not going into that. So it's mostly for cross MSPs. Lookups, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, let's move on.
Oh, we got one more.
Ben Schwartz.
Sorry.
Can you just confirm that string tag is like a Unicode string that can contain spaces and stuff?
It could be anything. This is requirement. We are not.
Well, so there's a difference between like this is a basically machine readable tag from some like from some registry space, and like this is a human readable text field. I'm just trying to, because the example is a little ambiguous there.
Yeah, so initially we started with just basic index, like numbers, all your mappings. So in priority order. So that one is basic. I think but the second one is trying to make it a little bit more useful, right?
So my recommendation, if it's still fuzzy, is that this should be a completely flexible human readable text field. It should have no machine readable significance, and the examples should maybe be tweaked a little to reflect that.
Okay, good point.
So just as the requirement, I think it might be useful to maybe up level a little bit or something. Either that or split it in two. It seems like it's not totally clear what this requirement is, but we are still only at the requirements phase. So like we don't have to design the solution. So I think it's worth kind of tweaking this a little bit to capture it.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it still feels like it's capturing two concepts. So yeah.
Okay,
that
got
one's
it.
lower.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay, is that it? Okay, let's go to the next, which is discovery protocol. This is where we have a lot going on here. So I will describe, first of all, the request. What is a discovery request? What were we thinking about for the requirement? And then I'll talk about the processing of that request, and then talk about the response, And finally, I come list all the requirements for these three: request, processing, and response. So for the request, of course, we expect also have a standardized message format for the request. And the request should include at least a phone number or an email address, which is the CSI. In addition to that, we want some important parameters. First, the client can indicate whether he wants this request to be federated, if that is a preference the client would like to specify. So federation means that I want this, you can either say, I want this request to be processed locally. That means using your own discovery mapping database only, or you might want it to federate, send the request out to a couple of your peer DPs and then aggregate the request. So you can specify that, or you might say, I'm only looking for Jonathan's WhatsApp MSPs. That I'm not interested in any other thing. So you can scope that request to a specific interest, whether Jonathan is reachable on WhatsApp or not, as well as the client might also include a preference list of DPs to federate with in order to process the query, and so on. So that's all about, those are the things we were thinking about for the requirement. We want it to be flexible for discovery client, whether it's the MSP or the app, to have different levers for tuning how a discovery request is processed. Next, before we come to the requirements, I'll talk about processing. So for the processing, we know doing a discovery is a privacy sensitive operation because it leaks the social graph of the user. So what we arrive at as a requirement is you either provide the identity of the entity making the query, or you protect the query itself, the content and the response, either making the user anonymous or using techniques to make the query payload confidential. So there might be default expected behaviors for discovery provider when they process query. It might be that don't always fan out queries to other DPs. Don't just use your local database alone because of bias. So there might be some standardized way in which discovery providers you operate. Mimi is not specifying that. We just an understanding for that. Also, we also expect that certain queries, maybe queries that are federated, may potentially be processed by maybe tens or even double digits, 50 DPs to see whether that mapping exists in their database. In practice, that can be really expensive in a federated setting. So for queries that is a fork, we should give the discovery provider leeway to rate limit client. So that means they may choose to rate limit clients to maybe 10 of those fork queries per day just because of the cost. And also some discovery provider may, because their endpoints, is low throughput, they may not be able to process queries fast enough and things like that. So they will not kind of become the slow hand link in the chain. So a DP can ration requests to those endpoints to improve overall throughput. Last but not the least, also when query gets federated or communication between peer DPs, what does the sub-protocol look like for how those two will communicate? What is the message format for that they will exchange for each of these? Some of those details will need to be specified. Last but not the least.
Can I just ask a clarifying question real quick?
Mhm.
What do you mean by default query? What do you mean by default query or non-default? I just don't understand what is meant by
yeah, so-
default in that case.
So non-default query is to queries whereby you say, just find me, broadcast this request to all other DPs anyway, I don't care, to find if a mapping exists for this telephone number. So it's like a fork.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So because that is a heavy load on that federation, because many DP potentially could be working on that. So that's why it's very expensive. Yeah. In terms of responses, we want to be able to accommodate different number of mappings, maybe no mappings, one mapping, two mappings, and so on. And secondly, we want the client to be able to say, I want a verbose or a compact response. Yeah, verbose means it should include all the metadata, including the digital signature, so that the client will be able to actually verify those signatures. But a compact format could be something very specific, a yes or no response to say, this telephone number is reachable on this MSP. We can think of a kind of encoding like a bit string, where each set bit can indicate the MSP on which that particular CISP is reachable. So the result is very compact, but it's still very broad. So we want the response format to be supported. Okay, next slide. So these are the requirements we have for discovery protocol. So the top two are for the request. The last two is for the response. So the ones in between is for the processing. Okay, John?
Yeah, I just want to say a little bit about both of those two chunks and places I still think we need to suss out a bit, like what we're trying to accomplish here. You know, to the second one in particular, you know, everything that I said earlier about why we trust mappings goes away in that compact form, right? And it is indeed just the DP that you are trusting in this instance. I can imagine architectures in which that is reasonable, and there are architectures in which your MSP and DP are the same entity, and you have a trust relationship with them, and that seems okay if all the mappings that they have accumulated are done in some manner that you approve of. But I really don't understand how users would ever be able to discern that. And like, to be honest, from a security perspective, it just creates a glaring, like unnecessary gap in the architecture that we're defining overall here. So I think a must for that is pretty strong, just personally to me, if we're trying to go through and like, you know, vet some of these today. You know, to the first bit, and again, this pokes at, especially at 10 here, at these questions of what kinds of preferences we expect users are going to express versus what preferences MSPs might have. And, you know, I can imagine MSPs, for example, sending discovery requests that would have preferences about that it only be within a particular federation, or that particular MSPs be filtered out of any responses and things like that. You know, punting that down to the user level, I get progressively less comfortable as I think about what the implications of that are, again, from discussions we've had about bias and so on. The idea that a user is aware that a federation exists, or, you know, a user says, well, I think, you know, again, because if we look at this at like the high level objective is to open up an architecture that is dominated by gatekeepers, I get real nervous when we start talking about, oh, well, you know, it turns out there's only 5 MSPs that I trust, and it's the gatekeepers. And like everybody else, I don't know, right? Like that is exactly what this entire enterprise here is attempting to not necessarily erode, but at least provide an alternative way of casting it. So I think we need to be super careful about the way that we cast filtering and suppression in this. And I think this really does come back to the suppression question when we start talking about MSP filtering and similar matters. Anybody else want to engage on this? We're not here to, you know, have Femi do a, you know, Spalding Gray monologue. Like, let's talk about this if people have opinions about it, please.
Please go ahead.
There you go. Yeah, Vittorio Bertola. Yes, I wanted to support this. I mean, I think that the purpose of this is actually not ending up with like the usual oligopoly of 5 operators doing everything, including the mappings and the certification of the ownership of the CSIs. I mean, I'm thinking at how this would work in my own case. I mean, if I have an email address which I would like to use as my CSI. I think it's the simplest thing for many of us. I mean, that don't want to use a telephone number for other reasons. And it's in a domain name that I own. So I should just be able to certify that I own the domain name and use it somewhere. I don't see why I shouldn't. I mean, I can give proof of ownership of the email to someone who will then be trusted to say, okay, I own that email address, and I don't see why we need more than that.
Okay, domain name. Okay.
Hey, so I just had a clarifying question. It seems like the federation model that you have in mind here is essentially that I ask my local DP to answer a query, and if that DP can't answer, then I kind of just like shotgun to a bunch of random people. Is that right?
It depends, yeah. So, I mean, we know, that's why we said a DP should be transparent about how they process query. We don't want their practices to be proprietary and hidden. So if a DP says, okay, for my DP, I don't federate, I respond to your request using my own data, and I created those mapping. So the user is aware of that. Or a DP may say, I have business relationship with these other listed entities, and I regularly federate queries with this entity because of that business relationship. So we want them to be transparent about it. So we can't really say you have to rely on your database alone or you have to federate all the time. I mean, there are so many things that can happen in the real world. Yeah. Okay.
I guess I want to gently disagree on the, like, I do think in certain contexts, it's probably a good thing for users to be able to understand there are federations like explicitly versus implicitly to the context of gatekeepers. Like if we don't make explicit that there are federations that can be in the position of gatekeeping, then the user won't necessarily be able to tell where the network starts and where the gatekeepers start. And I think it's like a good thing to talk about federations explicitly in certain UIs so that users can choose which federation of gatekeepers, like which cartel they want to engage with, instead of just assuming like the internet and the cartel are the same thing. So +1 for like in certain contexts, reifying the federation and ideally plural federations. But in enterprise context, it may not make sense.
Yeah. I'm not sure that's what Mimi will do, but I agree with you in principle. So yeah.
Yeah, pick your cartel, pick your poison. Is that, you know, competition amongst the cartels? Well, nothing bad ever comes of that. Yeah, I'm so distracted by that now. What is it actually came up to talk about again? Yeah, I think it was actually this DP shotgunning and fanning out in recursion thing. And yeah, when I talked about authenticated mappings earlier, I imagined a world obviously in which mappings could be shared, right? If a DP has a set of mappings, they could share them with other DPs. You could imagine a mesh, and maybe it would need to be within the context of a federation, that, you know, some business relationship that you would choose to share of these records. But underlying this are all these fundamental security questions about exactly how private we think those authenticated mappings are. And, you know, I still think there's a lot of back and forth in our discussions about this. And, you know, what we're saying, though, effectively in this draft, and Femi, correct me if I'm wrong, because you read it more than I have, you know, it's up to the MSPs to defend their users from spam, is bluntly what the current tone of this is. And so, you know, the question of how sensitive it is to actually just spread the DPs out so that you don't need to shotgun, right? Like, that's still an open question in the architecture, but it's these kinds of things we need to engage on to figure out what it is the requirement should be. So I would urge people to engage on this.
Yeah, because if the user kind of have a business relationship with an MSP and there is a mapping that gets created, does the MSP have the freedom to kind of share that with multiple DPs without the user being involved? There's some privacy thing going on there. Yeah. Okay. We have 11 minutes. I'll have to jump to the
Xavier.
next slide.
We have one more person in the queue.
One more person?
All right,
Yeah.
it'll be quick because I think there's a point that is really helpful to have for everyone in mind that it helps us understand many of these requirements. And that's the line that we really can't cross with these requirements, which is we're here in Mimi making a federation protocol between service providers. And we are not in the business of dictating to them the user experiences of the applications they provide or what they show to users or what end users should be allowed to do. I think anything where we're writing requirements that go that deep, much as we might all love it, like, wouldn't it be great if we could like make WhatsApp change its font to, its color to red? Like, we don't have that power here, and that's out of scope of the Mimi protocol. So I think we have to be careful to only tell them that things have to go to the client when they're like we have done for MLS, because it's cryptographically required. But from an end user experience perspective, we just have to draw the line there.
Yeah, thank you.
Ted?
Ted Hardy. Thanks very much, Jonathan, and I disagree. Because I think what we have on here isn't the Mimi protocol requirements, it's the discovery protocol requirements, and the discovery could be completely divorced from the actual service providers themselves. We're choosing an architecture where they're involved by helping produce the assertions that relying parties will use, and I think that's a fine architecture for us to use. But I think because we're trying to define this as a discovery protocol, there are certain things we should be saying about how the discovery protocol works that people either choose to join the federation and obey or don't. And some of those I think are critical for privacy, and some of those I think are actually critical for correct operation. Now, I completely agree with John that you could have a client that shotguns, you could have a client that trusts a particular MSP to shotgun on its behalf. You could have an MSP that's part of a federation that does either relaying out the queries once it gets something, or you have kind of a federation that pre-populates it into a single database and does it. All of those could be possible, but I think we have to be very, very careful in where we say this is going to be up to the MSP to decide, because otherwise, we're not actually providing any value to this discovery protocol over somebody being part of a walled garden that we're already in. So I think we do have to acknowledge that there's some pieces to this that we're gonna sign up for, and people will either choose to use the discovery protocol or not, but that aren't going to be completely, the MSP decides.
So I think one thing that could be useful to do is, I know we don't have a lot of examples in the wild of federation, but we do have examples of siloed systems and some federated things, just to look at what the existing user experience is around discoverability, I guess. Because obviously we're not gonna dictate what that looks like in the future in the federated case, but certainly that could give us a little bit of a sense of what the providers that are in the market today might want to be able to support. And I suspect it's like not a ton of options, right? And there's this like long history of this from social media too, where it was like, who do you want to be viewable by, right? So it might be worth just like looking at a few of those to inspire us about how granular of choices do we think we actually need to support. And my suspicion is that it's very few, that you're not going to want to pop a ton of different options to people, and that could be instructive for what actually goes in here.
Yep. Okay. So the next part is the operational requirement, looking at how does a user make changes after the user has established a mapping. Maybe the user gets a new phone number, maybe even forgets to do a remapping and things like that. Or the user thinks his privacy is compromised and recreates the mapping. Or I made my mapping available publicly on this service so that I could be discovered through it, but I've changed my mind. I'm going to take it down. So there are some of these operational things that are coming on. So also there's the aspect of timeliness, that once a mapping is removed and so on. I'll cover that a little bit in the other slide. Like when a user gets a new telephone number, how soon should the mapping in the old telephone number lie around for? And so on. Also, when a user creates a new mapping, how soon should that mapping become discoverable? Next slide. Okay, so just to explain this a little bit more, I'm going to cover this scenario where there are a single telephone number and there are two users. So at the first time, T0, the user gets the phone number from a CISP. And then the user creates a mapping for that phone number for a particular MSP. And then the user becomes discoverable by other user. And then so at some other point in time, the user recreates the mapping, maybe to rotate the keys and so on. And then after a while at T3, the user disconnect the phone number. So the phone number becomes invalid. However, the mapping still exists in the mapping backend for the discovery provider. That means at T3, other users, when they discover that mapping, the mapping is incorrect because it is mapped to an inactive telephone number. I also understand that when someone disconnects a phone number, there's like a period where the phone number goes to a pool. It's not immediately reassigned to a new user. I think in the US it's 45 days, minimum of 45 days and so on. So the discovery will still be finding that mapping even though the phone number is now in the inactive pool. The possible mitigation, this is a very challenging problem because telephone number routing, like some of you have worked on that before, is based on proprietary and legacy systems that are not even connected to the internet and things like that. So it's a very challenging requirement. So one thing is to say for DPs, they could subscribe to this pool. So when a phone number gets added, they just broadcast that phone number to say this phone number is not active, invalidate all mapping that exists in your backend with this. So this is challenging to do, but as a possible solution. The other thing is to say, assuming when the user 0, when it disconnects the phone number, maybe the user gets a new phone number and he now changed the mapping with the MSP could broadcast that to the federation so that they know, hey, this old phone number is no more valid, remove it from your backend. So it's very challenging. Now, come to T4, a new user gets assigned the same phone number. So, and the user does nothing. And then at T5, the mapping, of course, the mapping will be incorrect. When discovery happens, it will be finding the old user, not the new user or owner of the CISP. That can be challenging. Then the new user now creates a mapping to a different MSP. So now we have a situation whereby we have the old and the new that are both discoverable. So that is very challenging. So one suggestion we have for that at T5 is that when a user is creating the mapping, the DP should ask, is this the first mapping you are creating for this telephone number? If the user responds with a yes, that could mean all existing mapping across other DPs are no more valid. It could broadcast that. So just an idea on how complicated and how challenging dealing with timeliness issues for this mapping, making sure the mapping are legit. So for the requirements, yeah, the requirements. We're almost out of time. So any thought, any questions on the operational requirement? Feel free to drop a comment on the group. Because of time, let me go
why
to the
don't-
last.
Well, let's just make this the last one, if that's okay.
Okay.
Let's have a little discussion on this one and then.
Sure. Questions, thoughts? Yeah.
Okay. Okay, yeah, I think we will pick this up on a future interim. We
Yep.
can finish.
Okay.
But I think overall, do you feel like you got some good feedback?
Yes,
Yeah.
I do.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you very much. We're going to move on to Rowan, who is remote today.
Hello. Sorry, I didn't think it was wise for me to come in person today. So feeling a little under the weather. Okay, so let's talk about Mimi room policy. So this was one of the particular areas that we had in the Mimi protocol that was sort of a big hole that was left. And there've been some drafts. I submitted several cycles ago draft main Mimi group group chat, I believe was the name of the draft, which had a bunch of things related to room policy. But let's go to the next slide and see like what do I mean when I say room policy? So we've got things like properties of a room and access control for a room. So if you remember the slide from 2 days ago from the architecture presentation that Richard gave, there were sort of 3 different panes where we had the MLS state, we had the participant list, and then we had policy that was not related to the participant list. So I'm just going to go over a couple of these as examples. So the first one is the membership style of a room. So I think what everybody is familiar with a sort of like administered or members only kind of a room. So that would be the second membership style, where you have you can have group admins, and they can, in order to add or remove somebody, you need to be a group admin. We also have open groups, which would be like Discord channels or Slack channels, where you can where anybody can join. And what is being provided is really kind of some authenticity and message integrity, but not it's not like the contents of the group are particularly private. So like the Zulip chat, for example, that many of us are in right now. Then we've got fixed membership. So this would be like a group DM or a one-on-one connection, where once the room is created, there's like a fixed list of users that can be in it, and you can never add more. And then the final type that I listed is called parent dependent. So this is the kind of thing that you might use in like a moderator style chat, where you want to have sort of a like breakout sessions or like one-on-one DMs inside of a user interface that presents a sort of a larger room, and then I can have sort of a sub room. The property of a parent dependent room is that you can't have a member of the parent dependent room that isn't in the parent room. So Pretty straightforward. All right. Does anybody want to ask any questions about this before I go on to a couple other things? Great. Okay. All right. Then we also have this concept of, oh, can you go back, please?
Yeah,
We
sorry.
also have this concept of, we described very loosely the idea of there being roles, like maybe you have an admin or you have a moderator, different roles like this. We decided at a previous meeting that we wanted to not just have fixed roles, that we wanted to have sort of attributes or capabilities, and then we could define the Mimi provider when a room is created. It could say, okay, there's a role name and it has these attributes or capabilities. I'm gonna in the next couple slides, I'm gonna give 3 examples of this. And then finally, we have things which are not really related to the role specifically, but functions, for example, that are maybe required or optional or forbidden, like whether, for example, you can imagine that in maybe in an enterprise setting, you have a room where you want read receipts to be mandatory. But in like a large open group, you don't want to have all that traffic, and so they're forbidden. And while maybe in some other groups, they are optional. And there are a lot of these services that have policies for things like, particularly in an enterprise environment, for if I want to create a join link, maybe I want to allow people to create join links, but they're only valid for a particular amount of time, or they're only valid for a single user at a time, or they're only valid for a specific user. Okay. All right, moving on to the next slide. So I have 3 examples here of different sort of attribute-based access control room policies, just so people can kind of get an idea of what could be turned on and off. So in this case, I'm going to call this a strict administrator policy. And so here we've got on the upper right-hand corner, we have lists of the 5 roles that were defined for this type. So we have band, guest, ordinary user, group admin, and super admin. So the band user, of course, has no capabilities. Then we have guest users, and so these would be like maybe I want to be able to ask. Maybe I have a business that has some kind of a promotion, and I want to be able to ask other people to join a group to temporarily to ask a question, or to just be temporarily involved. So they can send messages and receive messages, and they can drop out. But for example, they can't go and add additional clients because there's not really an identity associated with them that's separate from the sort of like one-time password or one-time link that they use to join the group. Then we have ordinary users who could do everything that the guest can do. So they can add more of their own clients. They can change their own name. They can change their avatar. Maybe they can report abuse. Maybe they can send images and videos. Perhaps, let's see, what else? Yeah. But in this strict administrator policy, they can't add new users and they can't remove users. So a group admin, on the other hand, it can do all those things that the ordinary user can do. Plus, it can also add and remove participants. It can ban and unban. It could kick users out, and it can change the name of the room. Finally, it can destroy the room. It can create links, and it can promote or demote users from a different, from ordinary user to admin and vice versa. Finally, there's also in this example, there is also a super admin. So the super admin can change the room membership style altogether, and can promote and demote up to super admin. All right. So hopefully this all sort of seems like familiar stuff. Just for contrast, unless there are questions right now, let's go take a look at the next sort of at the next example policy here. Next slide, please. So this would be like a cooperative policy. So this maybe is a group of friends or family members that are they all sort of have they're all peers, and so you don't really need a group admin per se for most things. So what's different here is that every ordinary user can add and remove participants, can kick people out, and can change the room name, and can create join links. So most of the things that a group admin could do in the previous policy can be done by a regular ordinary user. There's also no guest. So presumably this would be the kind of thing you would do in a consumer environment where this is just I want all my friends to be able to chat, and like anybody can add anybody else. There's still a concept of a group admin, but it really the only thing the group admin can do that besides promoting and demoting to group admin is ban, unban, and destroying rooms. Okay. So hopefully people are getting the idea of the sort of subtleties that somebody could create here. I'm going to present one more, and then I'm going to talk about how this might actually be implemented so that this is not a burden, an implementation burden on for particular providers or for their clients. So last slide here. So in this one, we have a moderated room policy. So here, I introduced the concept of Knox and joining via links, where a non-participant can do. A non-participant actually has some rights, which is they can knock, unless they're banned. Guests only receive messages, and they can only remove themselves. Attendees still can add their own clients, and they can change their name and avatar. They can report, but they still can't send anything. And then we have speakers. So speakers can send messages. They can upload attachments, images, videos, and they can change the room name. And then the real power is with moderators, where moderators can add and remove participants. They can accept knocks. They can ban and unban. They can kick. They can promote and demote, for example, up to a speaker. And they can create join links. So like the moderator is really concerned about who has particular roles and who can be added and removed. So anything related to joins and leaves is sort of the moderator's responsibility, while speakers can do basically anything that is related to sending media into the space. Okay, so this seems like this could be pretty complicated, but I think in practical terms, most existing messaging service providers already have either a single type of this kind of a role, what roles people have and what they can do with them, or a small handful. One exception is Discord allows basically a full set of these kind of controls, and so that they allow a channel administrator to go and create these sort of arbitrarily complex roles that are like this. Now, if a provider wants to say, you can create a room and here are the policies, they just need to express their existing policy in terms of these attributes. They don't need to go and implement some new, complicated thing. They don't need to implement the entire framework. But clients need to be able to authorize, to react and authorize different actions and verify that they are correct based on the policy that is created. So this, I think, allows a fairly, a much more simple way for clients to be able to interoperate with a variety of different types of rooms without having to have, for us to all be arguing about, well, what does a moderator get to do? And we're going to define always what moderators do. Instead, we say, okay, this user has this role which has these attributes. Can they do something? Can they take this action? So I think that this is a tractable problem and a good solution for us. So, any questions?
Jim.
Yeah. Hi, Jim Fenton. I have a concern about can change own name. Is there a concern about a user posing as a different user in a room?
Yes, and this is particularly an issue for guests. If you have guests in an environment where you have users who have a sort of a confirmed identity, them changing their name so that it might be mistaken with another user's identity, that's something that is top of mind for many channel administrators. But I mean, if this were in a Discord room, for example, most people don't care. You could create whatever name you want, and no one cares if I have a particularly outrageous name or if it even conflicts with somebody else.
Well, I haven't really figured out the nuances between the three different classes of rooms that you presented, but I noticed that attendees in all cases could change their own names, and I wasn't sure whether the trust relationships were such that attendees should be able to pose as somebody else.
Yeah, so these are just examples, and so I think what's important here is we don't even need to define, like, unless a provider says, hey, you can go and do all of these things a la Discord. We don't need to, the protocol doesn't need to take a position on whether a particular role should have this kind of access or not. It's just that once a client joins an MLS group and its user joins the corresponding room, that it needs to make sure that that any changes in the policy that are occurring are consistent with the policy that is specified. It just needs to be consistent with the room policy.
Okay, thank you.
So
Travis.
we're a little over time, so let's take Travis and then we're going to move on, okay?
If you could just briefly cover, I guess, like how this is attribute-based rather than role-based access control. I'm just a little bit confused about the titling and naming here.
Yeah, so however you call it, the important thing is that you can define arbitrary labels for a role, and then the thing that defines what the role does are these attributes. So when a client needs to decide, was a particular action allowed or not, it's looking at the attributes associated with the role that it was assigned to a particular user. So Alice sees that Bob tries to remove another user. Alice is going to look at whatever role Bob has, and then is going to look at the definition for that role and is going to look to see if can remove participant is, if that attribute is enabled for the role that Bob currently has. Does that make sense?
I think so, yeah. I think it'd probably be better defined as role-based access control other than attribute-based access control, though.
Okay, yeah. I don't have a strong feeling about the name. All right, that's it for me. Did we?
Super quick, we should move on.
Super quick.
Mm-hmm.
Did you consider like a can assume role parameterized by a role ID?
So the promote role was what I used there. If you want to send some suggestions about somebody being able to temporarily assume a role, I'm all ears.
Cool, thank you.
Okay.
Thanks. So we could use people reading the draft and reviewing that draft and sending their comments to the list. Richard.
So I think the chairs decided there was insufficient fireworks this morning, and so they brought up our favorite topic in hopes that maybe we can actually put it to bed. So here is, oh, these are not the latest slides, but it's fine.
Oh.
It's fine, don't worry about it, it's just the one line.
Okay, let me see.
So here, like based on the discussion we had earlier in the week, this is a proposal that it was based on talking through with some folks and kind of trying to propose a way forward that seems workable here. So you may recall that on Monday, we discussed a spectrum of protection levels, ways that metadata might get exposed to different actors in the MIME ecosystem. So the lowest protection level is the one we're at right now, where the spec is right now, where everybody sees everything except for the messages. So the clients, the hub, all of the followers can see who's in a room, what the policy is, and all that stuff going, all the messages that manage that stuff. The next step up is to deny information to the follower servers. So keep the hub server in the loop so it can provide additional, it can help out with policy enforcement, with bans, it can add new devices, things like that. Obviously, they keep the clients in the loop, but the followers there aren't doing any work, so don't tell them what they don't need to know. Conrad also discussed a scheme for doing pseudonyms so that even if the hub server is seeing some of these policy interactions and assisting with stuff, they only see the users in terms of pseudonyms that can be per group, and so they ultimately leak very less information about the users and the users' activities in the system. And finally, Brendan sketched a scheme on Monday where only clients would have access to what's going on in the room. The hub would basically be locked out of everything. So all of the hub and all of the followers would be locked out of basically everything. And that comes obviously with some pretty sharp functionality trade-offs. So what I'd like to propose today is that we kind of cut off the two ends of the spectrum. Where we are today is, we know how to do better than that. It's unnecessary oversharing. The client-only version seems like it's too much functionality loss to be practical for what we're trying to do in this working group. And we focus on these kind of middle two options. So we have the client and hub server option level 2 as a baseline, the mandatory to implement thing that we do by default in the protocol, and then have work on the pseudonymous version that folks can opt into. We'll move to the next slide, please.
The clicker is kind of, you only have a few slides, so. You want to be on 3? 24. It's actually 24.
Oh, okay. You're from the original deck.
And Brendan is in the queue.
So, Brendan, let me defer. I'm just gonna. This is only like 3 slides, so I'm just gonna breeze through it, and then we'll have as much discussion as we would like at the end. So the insight here with this kind of 2-level design is that the core protocol doesn't actually care what the identifiers it's dealing with represents. So the core protocol is kind of agnostic as to whether an identifier is a pseudonym or an actual nym that actually represents a stable long-term identifier for a user. So if you kind of compare the regular and pseudonymous versions, they overlap entirely in the core protocol. And there's just some extra bits around the outside that the pseudonymous version needs to go. So you need to do things like acquire pseudonyms, unwrap pseudonyms, associate abuse reports, things like that. So it kind of wraps around the core protocol. So the concept here is to kind of set hooks in the base protocol. You need a little bit of capability negotiation, right? Because multiple actors are collaborating here. So you'll need a specification so it interoperates. You'll need to negotiate when you can do this. But That's kind of the affordance you need to make the pseudonymous stuff go in the base protocol. So the idea is in the base protocol, lock out the followers and kind of set the hooks that the pseudonymous stuff needs to get started. And then we can do the pseudonymous stuff as a separate add-on layer. So I think for the last slide, some clickers don't want to be working.
You pointed over here anyway.
Oh.
You made it.
Anyway, so this is the proposal in more detail than the first slide. Same proposal as the first slide, just with more words. So basically, two documents here: base protocol document. We take on this semi-private message thing that Rowan discussed, which does private message, encrypts with MLS the control messages, and also leaks them out to the hub server. So you expose the information to the hub, but not any followers. And we make sure as we're doing this that we actually have that agnosticism and we have enough of those negotiation hooks to get the pseudonyms tied in as when we need to. And then work the pseudonymous version in an extension document that says how you add those extra bits around the outside of the core protocol to make the pseudonymous version go. So I think we can start. I would propose the proposal here is we start with two documents, and then as we mature, revisit these questions as to what's mandatory to implement, whether we want to merge the two together, and so pull the pseudonymous stuff into the main document or things like that. But kind of work in parallel tracks to start, and then revisit as we go. So that's the last slide. Discuss.
So if we can go back to slide 2, please, where you say there's too much functionality loss for the client-only approach. What's the functionality there that you're concerned about losing?
Well, so this is what we discussed in the Monday session. So in the client-only case, you can't have a server assist in enforcing things like bans. Right? You have to do that at the end client level. You can't have the server assist with new clients joining because the server can't have the group info to distribute. So those are both, I think, pretty severe functionality losses.
So for the first,
happy to have folks, agree or disagree with that.
So for the first one of the server not being able to assist with bans.
Sorry, can you speak up a little bit?
For the first one of the server not being able to assist with bans, I assume that is like service-wide bans. That's not room-specific bans, you mean? Like where the whole list of users isn't able to be shipped down?
Certainly that would be the case, yeah. So I mean, a ban in the sense of, I don't want to talk to Jonathan anymore. I don't want him in any group that I'm in. I don't want him to start any new conversations with me. Just like, get out of my life, Jonathan. Like that's, you could in principle enforce that on a device basis, but it's a lot simpler to have that done at a centralized point.
Okay, but with pseudonyms, how are you still able to do that though? Like if Jonathan is joining with a pseudonym, how does the service know that this is Jonathan and to block him?
Oh yeah, sure. There are not. I mean, I'm not saying the pseudonyms are without trade-offs. That's why it's an opt-in and not the baseline. I think the sense I got from the discussion on Monday was that the trade-offs were less severe with pseudonyms than they are with the client-only approach.
Okay, so if both 3 and 4 both don't really allow the server to enforce like service-wide bans, then it sounds like what's left is the server support for external joins. And if you remember at one of the interims, we talked with Conrad. If you remember one of the interims, we talked with Conrad about an approach to allow server assist with encrypted handshake messages. And so with pseudonyms, the downside that it has is that you have to do like this handshake with users to be able to add them to the group. And with the sort of encrypted server assist, the downside there is that you need a secret key to be able to externally join the group. So if those are the two things, is we need a secret key to add someone to a group, or I need a secret key to externally join, it seems more user-friendly to require a secret key to be able to like rejoin a group than to have to add someone else to a group. Does that make sense? Or would you agree with that?
I'm not sure I'm following, but just since Alyssa pulled this up, this is the chart that Conrad presented, the feature comparison. It kind of gives an idea of the feature trade-offs with the two proposals, where me is the pseudonymous approach, encrypted handshake messages is the client-only approach.
And there's two of these. There's this, and then there's also the in-room things.
All right, I think we've got a little bit of a queue. So Brennan, you want to maybe have another couple folks and come back? All right, who's next?
Jonathan, Lennox.
Just a clarifying thing, this is just talking about the metadata outside the MLS context, right? It doesn't imply pseudonymity inside or one way or the other?
Correct, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, this is specifically about everything that's outside the MLS envelope, things like policy management, the roster at the MLS layer.
Okay. Yeah, so I wanted to clarify that in the base case, that a provider can still ban a pseudonym in that room, and that would still work just fine in that sort of third level. So I think we have. I was under the impression that we had pretty strong consensus that we needed these requirements.
DKG.
Hi. So I'm just, it sounds to me like there's a couple of specific things that we want in terms of that we would expect metadata to be useful for managing the operation of the room, like bans. And I wonder if it wouldn't be easier to characterize this by saying we have these two operational requirements that we want to have available for someone who does not have access to the contents of the discussion. And then try to figure out how we parse those requirements into capabilities that we can provide to some external party, whether they are the hub or not. Is there a reason why we're trying to tie these requirements to the hub? Say I wanted to have a conversation on a hub that, I wanted to be able to enforce bans for rejoins on, but I wanted to delegate those bans to, my preferred ban provider without leaking information to the hub about who was joining and who was getting banned. Is there a way to frame this discussion so that we don't tie these specific, we can identify specifically the functionality that we're trying to retain and then provide, the key structure that's needed so that some party can provide that functionality without getting access to the contents of the messages? Does that make sense as an alternate way to approach the problem?
Could I respond to that?
Yeah, I'm not sure who that was, but
that's Rowan.
But, sorry, before you respond, can I just ask a clarifying question?
Yeah.
Which is what you're proposing agnostic to either of these two options that we're discussing right now? Since in neither case are we capable of doing this, of supporting this ban functionality.
So I don't think we're.
I just want to make sure we stay on track with where we're trying to go with this discussion, which is to try to come to a conclusion. So
if I could answer on DKG's behalf, it sounded like the core aspect of what he was saying was in what I was hearing DKG say, there would still be some non-member of the group entity assisting this stuff. It just may not be the hub provider that's that entity. Am I capturing you right there?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, let me just say as a baseline, I don't actually believe that any hub provider can effectuate a complete ban because of Sybil attacks, right? I mean, the malicious party can just sign up for a sock puppet account and come in, whether there are pseudonyms or not. Yes. I mean, that's just how the universe works.
Well, I have a real name policy in my next.
Right. Yeah, you're looking for the fireworks. No, but right. So what I'm trying to identify here is that there's some functionality that we want some party to provide without giving that party access to the content of the discussion. So Rohan's like chomping at the bit. Conrad, are you okay with Rohan jumping ahead?
Okay.
Yeah. So the answer to your question is that if we allow semi-private message, the external receiver, you could set an external receiver to be your external band provider. So I think for simplicity, we didn't specifically discuss that, but technically, the way that we propose to go and implement this, you could totally do exactly what you asked.
Yeah, that was exactly what I was going to say. It's the baseline, what was proposed as baseline on my slide with using semi-private message. It says hub provider there, but in principle, you could arrange the crypto to go elsewhere. Now, I will say that the hub provider is like physically the hub, so it's kind of in the natural place to do policy enforcement. But the crypto could accommodate other designs. Conrad.
Okay. On the risk of kind of interleaving the conversation threads here a little bit, I wanted to go back to what Brandon said. So yeah, there's, even with the encrypted handshake messages, there's probably something we can do to enable these, the server-assisted join or external joins. But by doing that, by having these the encrypted registry and the encrypted group info on the server and tracking it, we leak metadata again. So if we want to do it efficiently, then if I send an encrypted commit, I also essentially send the encrypted path to the hub, but I have to tell the hub like which path it is. And so then the hub knows which leaf the sender is in high likelihood, except maybe like it gets a bit fuzzy, if you have an add and it updates a couple of paths, then it gets a bit, it's a bit softer, but you still kind of lose metadata. I just want to say, yeah, it's probably possible to get it working, but then you leak sender metadata again, so you kind of move closer to the pseudonyms in terms of what you actually protect. It's a trade-off again. Yeah, just want to jump in here for that.
Yeah, thank you, Conrad. So I sat down and I thought a little bit deeper about why I disagree with what's on the slide currently. And the reason is because encrypted handshake messages, we're talking about sort of a stock MLS feature, like an MLS thing that already exists. Me is something that we invented, though. So if inventing something new is on the table, then the choice is not between me and this stock encrypted handshake things. The choice is actually between me and the tree wrap idea we discussed at the interim. And they have different sort of functionality trade-offs.
Sorry, I did not get the distinction that you were just making. Everything is new here. Like none of this exists.
Well, so with the encrypted handshake messages, what we're talking about is using just the stock MLS encrypted handshake messages feature. We don't have to invent anything new. We don't have to do any kind of cryptography. With the pseudonyms approach, we do have to invent something new. But the question is, what new thing do we invent? Do we do the pseudonyms approach or do we do the tree wrap approach? And so actually in-depth discussing the differences between those two approaches is actually what's relevant here, not the difference between pseudonyms and stock MLS encrypted handshake messages. Does that help?
Yeah. Jonathan.
Jonathan Rosenberg, 5'9". I would say from a just pragmatic making progress thing, the most important thing to decide today is what's in the baseline. Like deciding what future extensions we may write one day, where one day is tomorrow or next year, like we can always do that. What matters is producing a baseline and then make sure there's sufficient extensibility hooks in the baseline to facilitate the addition of new things downstream whenever we decide to do them. So I think if we think about it that way, to me, I'm still in favor of the proposed baseline and would suggest that we don't even have to agree on exactly which protocols we'll do later, like that we can just agree on what's in the baseline. That's a thought.
Okay. Do you have a feeling one way or the other about that? Okay. Well, I'm trying to think about how to structure the set of questions here. So let's just come back we'll come back to that in a second, but let's deal with the tree wrap first. So I think on the tree wrap thing, I think we've talked about it several times. It does seem like it's related, but it's a bit orthogonal as well. And I'm curious if there's anybody else who has interest in continuing to pursue that as an option that we need to consider at this point in time. So if there's those people, get in the queue, get up to the mic, or put it in chat. Raphael.
Yeah, since I worked on tree wrap, I'm not entirely sure how this is being positioned now. So I think initially it was only meant to be an idea to complement the pseudonyms for a very specific way of actually encrypting the ratchet tree. So in my mind, at least, this is not a standalone concept that should be debated as a particular solution to the problems we're discussing here. So just want to say I'm a bit confused as to what people interpret when they say tree wrap.
Okay, thank you, Raphael. Go ahead, Conrad.
Okay, maybe just for my own sake, but maybe everyone else's as well. So we're now discussing, like, we're still with the discussion between the pseudonym-based approach and the encrypted handshake messages approach. And sure, we can assume that although we haven't worked out the solution, we can have an external join with encrypted handshake messages using tree wrap. Again, the details would have to be figured out, and the exact loss of metadata protection we get from that, we would also have to quantify somehow. But that still leaves us with a difference both in metadata protection and functionality loss. And isn't the question now to maybe go back to how we quantify, like what exactly the difference is in terms of quantifying, what exactly the difference is in the loss in functionality and the metadata protection, and see if the trade-off is worth it. Is that roughly what we're talking about here? I guess I've kind of lost track a bit.
That is literally the conclusion that we're trying to. I thought that we were trying to come to today, which is
okay.
If we thought we needed to select a particular approach for the option that will be metadata privacy protective, whether people are comfortable selecting the pseudonym approach. That was the question we were like attempting to tee up for today, in addition to the question about what is the baseline. Now, Jonathan is arguing we should separate these out and we should first ask about the baseline, and then we may or may not need to decide today about the metadata privacy approach. But honestly, we've talked about this a lot, and I kind of would prefer to put them both to bed today. Does that make sense, Conrad?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay.
And yeah, maybe just since the queue is empty, just my own 2 cents. Or clearly, I'm biased towards the pseudonym approach. I like the kind of just the fact that the hub can actually do some policy enforcement. So yeah, just wanted to highlight that even though the encrypted handshake messages can make the external join work or the server assist work, I think having the hub inspect messages and do some amount of access control, for example, the attribute-based access control that Rohan proposed, I think is worthwhile.
So I've already said this, but just to reiterate a little bit clearer, the difference between pseudonyms and tree wrap, it's totally about user experience. So with pseudonyms, you have to go through this handshake with every user that you want to talk to be able to get like a pseudonym key for them. And if you don't do this handshake where both users have to be online, you actually can't add that user to a group. With the tree wrap approach, you can add anyone to a group anytime. The restriction is solely on when you're able to do external joins.
Could you repeat that, please, Brendan?
Which part? All of it?
Yes, please.
Okay, so the difference between pseudonyms and tree wrap is completely about user experience. The user experience of pseudonyms is that you have to go through a handshake with every user that you contact, where both users have to be online and you have to get like a secret from them to be able to add that user to a group. And if you don't do that handshake with every user, then you actually can't add them to a group. With the tree wrap approach.
That's not true.
Rowan, can you please let him finish? And I see you're in the queue.
With the tree wrap approach, you can add any user to a group anytime. The only constraint is on when you're able to do external joins.
Conrad.
Okay. Essentially what Rohan said, I don't think that's accurate. So it's true that for the pseudonym-based approach, you need to have some sort of connection establishment protocol. It's not true that both have to be online. You can just send a user an invite and they can accept it asynchronously. And then you have the key material you need to add them to groups. It's essentially like a consent mechanism that we probably want anyway. And just in terms of terminology, by tree wrap, we mean like it's a method of encrypting stuff so that you get, you know, PCS-like guarantees. For example, in the pseudonym-based approach, encrypted credentials that you have to store with the group, but you can also use tree wrap to encrypt the registry. Just want to make sure that we don't equate tree wrap with the handshake messages approach. So those are two different things.
Go ahead, Rowan. Oh, okay. I guess Conrad said what you were going to say. Okay. So now we have to figure out how to come to a decision. I'm still. You're sitting down. Okay, fine. Again, we've. Oh, you're back in the queue. Are you in the queue?
If you feel like you want to propose something, go for it.
I feel that. Well, let me ask this. I feel that we've had ample time to explore the differences between the different metadata privacy approaches to the point where we're approaching diminishing returns, and we should try to call the question. Do other people feel like they need more time to understand the metadata privacy approaches? If you feel like you need more time, come right in the chat, come to the queue. No. Okay. So I would like to get a sense of the room on whether people support the approach that's on the slide. So I will write that up as a question in the tool, and we'll take the poll. There's 71 people in the meeting, and there's 14 responses. I didn't hear whatever that was. I didn't hear. Going once, going twice. Oh, they're still trickling in. People are making up their minds.
And if you've already talked about, you should fill out the survey.
Yeah, you should. Yes. Search your email inbox for Qualtrics while you're waiting. Okay, I'm going to terminate the poll. So we had 18 yes, 2 no, and 7 people with no opinion. So I think sense of the room is we should proceed with this plan. We will confirm it on the list for those who weren't able to join the poll. But I think this is roughly the direction it seems like people want to go after we confirm that. And I don't know, are there changes you need to make to the protocol document for the semi-private messages? Yeah. Okay. So if that's Right, yeah. So let's confirm, let's see what happens when we confirm it on the list, but if that's the way we go, then we will spin separate document for pseudonyms and incorporate the changes in the base protocol. So thank you, everyone. 10 minutes left. One thing I wanted to talk about was interims going forward. So we've been having these interims every other week, mostly, unless we cancel them. And my proposal was going to be that we pick those up again, either like end of August or beginning of September, just because people tend to be on vacation and there's not a lot of attendance. What do people think about that? We got some physical thumbs up in the room. Any objections? Keep the same time on Wednesdays, whatever that time is in your time zone. Noon Eastern. Okay. And I think we could probably start, well, let's see where we are, but we clearly have more discovery that's already teed up, ready to go. But we can come back to the rest of the topics as they're ready to. Was there anything else that people wanted to come back to? Anybody want to talk about file downloads some more? That was the other one we had left over. Or, I mean, we have 10 minutes. Do you want to continue with discovery, or do people feel like they context switched? Done? All right. Enjoy your lunch. Thank you.